everyone. Thank you for joining us for the next session of our Get Certified in DP-600 series. My name's Anna. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions to answer live. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours right here on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. This session is a part of a series. To view past shows on demand and to register for future sessions, please visit aka.ms/getcertified/DP600. With that, I'll turn it over to our speaker for today. Thanks for joining us, Heidi.
Thanks, Anna, and welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about the tips and tricks for exam day, focused on DP-600, but we're going to cover all the different tips I've learned over the years. So just a reminder, you are in the middle of this series right now, so you would have seen the benefits of getting certified. Now we're going to talk about the crucial thing of how to prepare for exam day and the 24 hours leading up to it. And then the last session of the series, you're going to prepare for actually passing DP-600 exam. Don't forget to save that link. You'll see it on the screen now. It's the aka.ms Get Certified DP600. So a little bit about me. My name's Heidi Hastings. I am a Microsoft MVP, which means Most Valuable Professional, and MCT Microsoft Certified Trainer. I've been doing data and analytics for over 10 years now, but that doesn't mean that was my first IT career. I was actually a software developer before that. And you might have seen me on other live learn series or as a speaker and attendee and volunteer at tech events all over the world. And my current certification count is 16. Now, don't be intimidated by that. I used to hate doing exams. I would stress out. It was so complicated for me and I didn't want to do it. In the last probably 3 years, I've gone from only having 1 to now having 16. So if I can do it, you can do it. But don't worry, if exams aren't your thing, that's perfectly okay. It wasn't mine originally, and now it's my jam. So let's talk about what I did on the day I passed DP600. So DP600 was quite a challenge. I wasn't actively working in the Fabric space. I was working with data and analytics. I was working with Microsoft products, so it wasn't a far stretch, but I wasn't day-to-day in and out of Fabric. So on the actual day of exam, I make sure that my mind is perfectly clear and focused on just the exam. I mean, I love watching TV shows and things, but leading up to the exam, I had to make sure, nope, we're not going to watch TV shows. We're going to make sure that we study cram for this exam so that all the recent stuff in my memory is all focused on the exam content. So I'd wake up, make sure, I have my morning coffee. If you're a coffee drinker, morning tea. If you're like me, I drink tea. Make sure that I've had enough water, make sure that my environment is, set up for me, air conditioning set up or the heater's on, depending on where you are. You got to make sure that the environment's set for you. You got to decide whether you want to go to a testing center or whether you want to sit the exam as online proctored. So I choose to do mine online proctored because I find the most restful thing for me is at home. So I set up a little portable table in my lounge room, sit on the couch, dial into the exam, and just focus on the exam for that day. I make sure no one else is in the house, of course, because that can disrupt your exam if you've got other people in the house. Because it's important when you are taking an exam that if you're doing an online proctored, you're the only one within not only the field of vision of the proctor watching through your webcam, but also there's no audio of other people, wandering around the room you're in. But I make sure I do a bit of a study cram leading up to the exam as well. So it's important to do those quick little last minute refreshers, but make sure it's not something that's going to stress you out. If going through the content over and over, you just find your mind's glazing over and it's just the content's not sinking in, take a break, take a breather. Doesn't mean that you can't look after yourself. It's important to be, looking after your health and well-being and not just focusing on, oh my God, I've got to get all this content in so that I can sit the exam. So it's okay not to study right up until the last minute, and make sure that you've got your device, make sure you got your laptop ready, make sure you got a webcam ready, make sure you got a second webcam just in case, and make sure you've got a hotspot available on your phone as backup for your internet, because if you're like me in Australia, the internet's not so crash hot. The other thing is if you're going to go to a testing centre, if you're going to go to a testing centre in person, that can de-stress you a lot because it's the responsibility of the testing centre to make sure that you have a computer, that all the environment factors are taken care of, and that you just rock up, tell them which exam you're doing, make sure you have an appointment, and in you go and sit the exam. So you can take away all those things, but you do have to make sure that how you're going to get there, you've allowed enough time for public transport or to drive, that there's parking available, the traffic, all those sorts of things you've got to take in. So let's talk about what the exam is like. I've now sat through 16 exams, so this one's well and truly in my mind. But for those of you who've never sat an exam, the first thing to know is the duration. Microsoft gives you a large amount of time, so in this case 2.5 hours, to go through all the questions. Now, whilst I can say that's plenty of time, everyone's different. So you may take 20 minutes, you may take 2.5 hours. It's okay to take however long you need, as long as you fall within that 2.5 hour total. And within the exam platform, you can actually see that time as you're going through the exam. So you don't have to worry about trying to keep track of what the time is for as you go through the time period. You have that available on the platform. But if seeing a countdown clock can stress you out, the platform allows you to toggle that clock off as well. So you can do it either way. You want to check in 30 minutes prior. So that means if you're doing it at a testing centre, make sure you're there 30 minutes before your appointment so that they can have everything ready, and all you have to do is just wait for a little bit and then start the exam. If you're doing it at home, that 30 minutes is crucial to be able to make sure your laptop is set up, that your room meets all the criteria, that as you join the queue, the proctor can see you and your webcam's all working, that your internet connectivity is okay. You've got to consider things like if the power suddenly goes out, what am I going to do? So make sure your laptop's well and truly charged. Or if you've got a desktop, make sure there's only one monitor attached. I know, as people doing these sorts of exams, we probably have a few monitors, but for the exam, you've got to have just the one. And the maximum time you can do it is 2 hours. So take all those things into account, but don't let it stress you out. If you start to think that clock's racing in your mind, just take a few deep breaths and go, it's okay, I'm prepared for this. And worst case scenario, I fail, and that's okay, because then you're going to get tips on how to do the exam better next time. So even failure is still learning. It's okay. In terms of the questions, you've got 40 to 60 questions, and that can vary by exam. And then the important thing with Microsoft exams, it's the best answer. So when you're reading through a question, look for the little nuances in the question that might rule out different answers. And the other thing is, you might think from your personal experience and from your learning, if you're reading the question and you think there's more than one answer, have a look at what would be interpreted as the best answer. It might be something like, say you've got 4 different options, and then you have to consider, well, what is the most cost optimal, or what is the most security conscious? Look at the little lead-ins in the question. It might indicate which of those ones is considered the best, even though multiple might be perceived as correct. Got to look for that best one. And the best is kind of subjective. So try and think about the little nuance in the question, then think about general Microsoft things. So you've got the concept of cloud adoption framework, well-architected framework. So is the option the best in terms of cost optimized? Then that would be the one to go for. There's a concept of a build list. With a build list, it's a case of saying the question may ask you, what are the steps required to set up a lakehouse? And so the build steps is going to be a series of different activities to get you to that outcome. It could be enable the tenant, make sure that you have a workspace, and then have a workspace that's associated with a fabric capacity, and then create the lakehouse within that workspace. And there'll be a few dud answers in there too, so you've got to watch out for those. But in that build list, you're going to prepare all the steps in order to achieve an outcome. Drag and drop is where we have a sentence that includes blanks. With those blanks, you'll have a list of possible values, and you've got to try and drag and drop the correct value into the blank space. With multiple choice, that's where you're going through a question and it may ask you, what are the 2 properties to set to achieve this outcome? And that's where you know you've got to pick 2. Sometimes it'll say, pick all options that apply up to a maximum of 3. Those sorts of things. So that's where you get multiple choice. So the question types vary throughout each exam to a total of 40, 60 questions. And a quick tip here is that if you're going through the exam and you find yourself not sure on an answer, it's okay. Mark it for review and come back later, because you never know, as you're reading the other questions, it might jog your memory on an answer to one that you weren't sure about. Then we've got the case study. The case study, one of my favorites. It seems really daunting when you first open it up. You've got this massive background. It tells you all about the customer, all about the problem, all about what their future state is, and it's a lot of content. And then there's a series of questions targeted towards that content. I personally approach it a little bit differently to a lot of people. A lot of people read the case study in full and then they go to do the questions. I go in the reverse. I read the question and then I identify the targeted sections within the case study to read, because Microsoft's really good in giving us little categories so that within the backgrounded information, it might say, future requirements, security considerations, overview of the company. So I can read the question and then target the specific areas I need to read to focus to answer on that question. Because for me, too much information is a bit of an overload, but for other people, reading the question at the end is more suitable. So sometimes people will prefer to read the entire case study so they have the full frame of information in their mind, and then they target the questions and go through and answer them. The important thing to note here with a case study is once you start the case study, you can't go out of the case study. And once you finish the case study and mark it as finished, you can't go back and review it. So take your time going through it. But again, don't stress. You got 40 to 60 questions. Give yourself a little bit of time on each question so that as you go through the questions, if you find this one you're not sure about, give yourself a couple of minutes to think about it more, to go through and see if you know the answer or see if you can jog your memory. And if you can't, just mark it for review and come back later. Because if you sit on one question for 20, 30, 40 minutes, you might run out of time. So make sure that you're conscious of how many questions you're getting through and the amount of time you want to spend on them so that you know whether or not you're going okay in terms of the overall time. Okay? The score. Seems very confusing to score an exam out of 1,000 when you've only got 40 to 60 questions. That's because each question has a different rating. So while the score range is 0 to 1,000, as you go through each question, that question comes from a particular area within the different sections of the exam, and each area has a different weighting. So it might be doing the Power BI modeling, semantic modeling may contain 25 to 30% of the exam. That means you're going to get more questions in that area and they're going to be weighted higher because it's a deeper level of content they want you to understand. To pass the actual exam, you need to get 700 or greater. And as you're clicking through the exam, you're not going to know which question is worth what, and you're also not going to know whether your total is over 700. Unfortunately, you only find out to the end. But the great thing is you find it out instantaneously. The scoring is scaled, but you get no points deducted for answering incorrectly. So don't worry if you just I'm not sure, I'm just going to guess this one. Guessing's still an option because you're not going to get any points taken away from you for answering incorrectly. And that when you get to the end of the exam, there's actually the option to review the questions you marked for review. So you can go back through and see the questions that you've marked for review and go through them. So you'll know when you get to the end, you go, okay, I marked 20 for review. How much time do I have left? Let me go back and review those questions. And in recent times, really excited that Microsoft allowed Microsoft Learn content to be available while you're doing the exam. So as you're going through the exam, if you're not sure, you have the option to split screen and load the Learn modules. Now, it's important here, you won't get access to your favorite search engine or Copilot or practice tests, so you only get the Learn modules. With the Learn modules, you get access to the search, so you can go in and search for a specific module, but don't rely on this solely to pass the exam because it's not going to help you trying to search for every single question in the Learn modules to try and answer it. But with the question, so you can see here in the example, I've got the question on the left and I've got the Learn module on the right. So I can go through the Learn module, identify a Learn docs area that helps me for this question, read through that and then try answering the question again, or I simply mark it for review, come back later, or I don't use Learn. It's an optional feature. They didn't always have this. It's sort of the last 6 to 12 months it was introduced, But it's pretty cool to have that little assistant there, because sometimes you know where you can find it in the docs, and now you have the Docs and Learn articles available to you. So just be sure you won't have access to Copilot, just saying. But make sure you keep an eye out for the time, just in case. All right, what to expect on the actual day. So as you lead into the day, you're going to do a check-in. That check-in in person is making sure you're at the testing center, register with the organization you're testing with, make sure that you're there in enough time that they have all the information ready for you, and off you go. If you're doing it at home or in an office or a shared space that you have access to, you're going to do a check-in that requires you to not only install software on a laptop. So if you're using a work computer, a personal computer, or anything else, make sure that before the exam, you've gone ahead and installed the software required for the check-in. Sometimes that tech check can take about 6 minutes or more. So give yourself plenty of time in that 30-minute window to go through the tech checks, make sure your internet connection's good, make sure your webcam's good, make sure you've gone through all the proctored precursor checks. So they'll want to make sure the room that you're in, there's nothing around your laptop, that it's all clear, that you've got no phones, no smartwatches, no extra cables that they're not sure about. Make sure you've got all those. Once you complete the check-in and you're in the queue, they'll let you know once your queue position is up, and then they'll start the exam. Now, don't panic if the screen goes all white and the exam doesn't load. Give it a little bit of time. It's got to send the exam through to your device and then open it up. I had that experience recently where I had no exam came through, but you always have access to talk to the proctor. So you can go in, click the proctor, and ask to talk to them, and they can talk you through any of the issues you're facing. Then you're going to review the exam question, and then with the exam instruction, and with those instructions, it's going to talk you through what the exam's going to be about. Once you've reviewed the instructions, you say, yep, I'm good to start the exam. So this is where you want to take those 3 deep breaths, clear the mind, make sure you're all at the ready. And a couple of tips if you're doing proctored, if you're like me, I like to read out and my mouth moves as I'm reading the questions. Make sure you try and refrain from doing that, because it makes it look like you're talking to someone in the room. And so the proctor will tell you off pretty quickly. You start the exam, you're in the exam, and off you go, off and racing through all the questions. If you have any issues, if there's a technical difficulty, something happens. Every so often you get this little taskbar that shows your webcam, the proctor, and a whiteboard if you're doing it remote and online. If there's any issues, press the chat, press the proctor, ask to talk to them, or message them on chat so that you can get it resolved, because sometimes you can have a little bit of a buggy experience. But don't panic. It's okay. There are people there to help. Once you've gone through all the exam and you're like, okay, I don't want to go through it again, I'm happy with what I've answered, you submit the exam. And instantaneously, in both scenarios, you'll get the results on your screen almost instant, right? Pretty cool. Now, this is the moment where you're like, because you're like, did I pass? Did I fail? Either way, you gave it a go. And that's the important thing, is that you gave it a go and you looked at what worked for you. Now, if you pass, great. You get the results straight away that you passed. Congratulations. Important to celebrate. And then you'll also get details of how you went for each section, which sections you were strong in, which sections you might need a bit more effort in. If you failed, also okay, because you get details on what your strengths and weaknesses were so that you can do additional study for the next time. And you can resit the exam. There are some guidelines around when you can do it, like 24 hours later for the first time. I think it's 14 days after each subsequent attempt, up to a period of 5 attempts per year, if I recall, calendar year. So important, celebrate, celebrate, celebrate. You put in the hard yards, you did the work, you took the exam, you gave it a go. If you didn't pass the exam, it's okay. Again, you gave it a go. Make sure that you take time to read through what you did well and what you didn't. They're not going to outline every single question, but they will give you section information. And then you can consider whether or not you want to resit the exam. Now, before we get into what comes next, we are live, so I want to make sure we cover off some of your questions. So you're probably wondering, what's the best way you can practice navigating around Learn? Well, you have options for the practice exams. So as you're going through the practice exams, consider setting up a second browser next to you that's already defaulted to the Learn module homepage. As you're going through the practice exam, if you find there are ones you're not sure about, try navigating only using the Learn module search to try and find the docs that relate to that practice assessment. And then if you do, remember what search you'd used. So remember whether you're searching for like headings or whether you're searching for particular text in the Learn module that you're familiar with. And also make sure when you're reading the question, read it a couple of times, because sometimes the words that you skip over as you're reading it, because we're human, we're pretty good at reading things these days. So make sure that you've looked at all those little nuanced words in there in case one of them trips you up on a particular option. Had that happen to me before. What are some other things we might want to do? What if you need assistive technology for the exam? Let's say you need a screen reader. Consider looking at that before you start the exam. You've got the option to not only do practice exams, but also to do an exam simulation. So there's a little lab that you can spin up. That means you're installing the same software that you would use before you do the check-in for the exam. So you can make sure your device is all at the ready. You can make sure the tooling that you use is suitable and accessible within the exam. If you need assistance from an additional person during the exam, you can make sure that that's organized before you start the exam. So make sure when you're registering to sign up for the exam, if you do need any forms of assistance, that you go through and make sure those are organized for you. And if you have specific technology that you use, make sure if that's technology that Microsoft has already endorsed available to you. Or you may have to look at an alternative screen reader that they do support so that you can know that you can sit the exam, or talk to your local testing center to make sure that their devices are set up with everything you need for the exam. There is the option to put the exam on pause. So if you need to take a quick bathroom break, you can pause the exam while you're going through. But the thing to note there is if you pause the exam to make sure that everything's still on the up and up, you won't be able to revisit questions you already answered. So be mindful of that. Make sure you take a bathroom break before you start. Make sure that you've had, a glass of water before you start so that you're all ready to go for the actual exam. What's going to come next? Definitely join the rest of this series or watch it back because, like I said, we're delivering it live today, but it may be you're watching a recording. Start preparing for the exam. DP-600 is not necessarily an easy exam, but no exam's easy. Everyone has different levels of easy. So make sure you're prepared, and each person's preparation is different. You may find you go through all the Learn modules related to the content, and then you go through the study guides that are available, and then you go through and do individual study that's suitable for you. You might even try out the features in your own lab sort of environment or demo area. But make sure your preparation is what works for you. Consult other people. Everyone's different. Someone may have a different idea. I like to do practice exams. I like to do them simulated in the exam scenario with a time period and a fixed number of questions so that I can put myself in that moment. So it's kind of like muscle memory once I get in there. I'm less focused on how the exam operates and more focused on just the exam content questions. And the last one is one of my absolute favorites. Earn a free exam voucher. They are limited though, so try and get in before they run out, but make sure you get those free vouchers. My personal blocker for taking exams was the cost, because in my mind, I was going, oh my goodness, if I don't pass this exam, I've spent Australian $128. That's a lot of money. That's like a couple of hours of my work time that I've now burned on an exam. So I love getting the vouchers because it takes away that stressor for me. It takes away that blocker. So as you're doing your exam day prep, look at what blocks you from sitting an exam. And exams are not for everyone, and that's okay. If it's not your jam, it's not your jam. But if it is, or if your blocker is related to cost, look for vouchers. If your blocker is because you want to make sure that you've gone through every single Learn module before you sit the exam, make sure you give yourself enough time to do that. I also look at it and go, if I'm going to sit the exam in 3 months' time, that's great. But I set up a backup so that in 3 months' time, I decide on the Saturday, I'm going to sit the exam. In the event that anything is going to go wrong, power drops out, family emergency, whatever the case may be, I make sure the following Saturday I've also got as reserve so that I can come back and sit the exam a week later if something goes wrong. So give yourself options. Think about it. When you're building fabric analytic solutions, you probably look at how you're going to do backups, how you're going to do restores. What do you do if something goes wrong? The exam is no different to that. Think about when you're going to sit the exam, what factors you need to consider. Have you got, an appointment to go to right after the exam? Make sure that's not going to stress you out. Make sure your environment is what works for you. If going to a testing center is going to help, go to a testing center. If being at home helps, be at home. If a shared workspace that has meeting rooms is available and that works for you, use those. Anything you need to do. But make sure you touch base and check out this series so that we can help you prepare. And just remember, there's this entire global community out there who wants you to succeed. So have a look for those study groups, have a look for the exam cram sessions, jump on YouTube, look at Learn, make sure that you're making available to yourself everything to get you prepared, and reach out if you need some help, because we're all here for you to be successful. And thank you all so much for attending this session. I'll double check in case we've got questions, because I know you're sitting there in the chat wondering, what about this? What about that? So just in case, chuck those questions in the chat if you have any questions. But otherwise, I think you're all prepared for exam day. Ooh, and before I forget, there's going to be a short survey at the end. So please stick around to answer that survey and help us make these sessions great for what you need.